And put an intro. All right, here we go. And 3, 2, 1, you're live.
The following show is sponsored by Lee, Cosell, and Crowley, serving the legal needs of Indianapolis, the state of Indiana, and the Midwest for over 40 years. And here's our host, Nathaniel Lee.
Milton. Hey, Milton, log in. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. Thank you very much. This is a live call-in show. Today we have a superstar panel intact, Attorney Vanita Banks and Attorney Milton Grimes from LA. Also, we have a special guest, Attorney Robert Turner, who's a certified police legal advisor. But before we get started today, there's a couple things that have been making the news, and there are so many important issues, but one of the most important issues in the history of America, our democracy, dealt with the January 6th committee. The United States House of Representatives formed a special select committee to investigate the terrorist attack on the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021. What happened is that then President Donald Trump attempted to overturn the 2020 presidential election by telling false statement instead of conceding defeat. He lost the election with a popular vote of over 7.2 million and electoral vote by a pretty substantial margin. In fact, during the two election, he lost by more votes than anybody in American history. It was almost 10.5 million. Although he won against Hillary Clinton, but the popular vote, he lost by 3.3 million. And what we learned this week, with all the Republicans who surrounded Donald Trump, is that he did something that was unthinkable in American history. The president of the United States summons a mob, and he incited them to kill the vice president, who was Mike Pence. In other words, folks, the president of the United States of America, this is not a banana republic, he encouraged a mob of angry protesters to kill the vice president. And I was watching this in disbelief that we can get such graphic evidence where a staff, Hutchinson, testified as to how unhinged the meetings were inside the White House. We had a police officer testify how the president angrily wanted to go and lead these mobsters as they invaded the Capitol. The first time in American history that we've had a president of the United States who's begging to lead a mob to attack the United States. It's just bizarre set of facts in American history. And, I don't think that in the history of our democracy, we've ever had anything so insane to occur. But somehow people across the United States, maybe they're not paying close attention to this, but it just shows that how deranged the former president was. I mean, this was crazy stuff. But in any event, we've had so many mass shootings. Switching subject, we had 2 mass shootings in Indianapolis. And don't forget, folks, this is a live call-in show. Our phone number on our Zoom link is 463-204-0419. 463-204-0419. And we had in Attorney Banks' neck of the woods a couple of weeks ago during the 4th of July, we had a terrible tragedy in her city. And Attorney Banks, could you give us an update about what has happened since that mass shooting up there near where you live at in the Chicago suburbs?
Good morning, Attorney Lee and Attorney Grimes. I am calling in live from the National Bar Association 97th Annual Convention in Memphis, Tennessee. It's our first in-person meeting in 2 years of this nation's oldest and largest national association of predominantly African-American lawyers, judges, law professors, and law students. And so we're very, very happy to be convening live where we will be discussing the critical legal issues of the day, including gun control and voting rights and election protection. And with respect to Highland Park, the mass shooting that occurred on July 4th, and let me just say from the outset that from my perspective, what we're witnessing as a nation is domestic terrorism, in the sense that citizens of the United States can no longer go to a movie theater, a church, a July 4th parade, the mall, without fear of being gunned down by, another citizen with a weapon of mass destruction. And so in Highland Park, the shooter has been charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder, and that is the first of many, many counts. And I really applaud the Lake County State's Attorney, Eric Reinhardt, who expeditiously issued those counts because the people of Highland Park that's one step in moving forward in the aftermath of that tragedy that occurred, senseless tragedy that occurred on July 4th.
How could you explain that a young male, white male, could try to shoot everybody in the city and he's arrested? He doesn't have a scratch, a bump, a bruise, a gun wound. And we've had all these shootings as African-American males for traffic tickets and things. Every day we see this. And why do they treat this mass murderer, this terrorist, with such kid gloves? Was his father, isn't his kid also his father a former mayoral candidate there in that city? Attorney Banks, did you hear me? Okay, I may have lost
Attorney Lee, you're breaking up a little bit. What was your question again?
Well, the mass shooter, I read an article that his father had ran for mayor of that city before, and he was a gun proponent. And I was just shocked that when they arrested him, he didn't have a bump, a bruise, a scratch, no injury. And every day I see that there's some African-American get a traffic ticket and get beaten almost to death. And I'm wondering, why do they handle him with such kid gloves?
Well, that is the stark disparity that we've witnessed on many occasions. The disparity in how Black men and boys and people of color are apprehended, and how majority people are apprehended. According to the news here in Highland Park, what we witnessed in terms of the apprehension of the shooter was in accordance with how it should be done. That's what I heard. And so, yes, you're absolutely right that his father did run for mayor a few years ago against the incumbent mayor, who, and this family is well known in Highland Park, and now well known in terms of details to the nation. And the current mayor, Nancy Rodering, was the shooter's Boy Scout leader.
Wow.
And so this family is very, very well known. They've had a couple businesses in Highland Park, and just a very well known. They've also had lots of incidents that have resulted in the police going to their home, including when the shooter had threatened to kill everybody in his family, and was waving knives and daggers had also threatened to commit suicide, as well as all of the social media depictions of him, and his music actually playing out a mass shooting. And so, as you know, many questions have been raised as to why the father sponsored his son in obtaining the firearm permit.
Okay. The second issue, Attorney Turner, is that we had 2 mass shootings in Indianapolis region, Greenwood. We had one on the south side of Beech Grove here in Indy. But the shooter was killed by a private citizen. And I read some report that the private citizen shot up to 10 times at the assailant or something to that effect. And I was concerned about that. It was terrible to have a mass shooter, but they were applauding this young man as a hero for saving lives. But I was concerned in that situation, it worked out very well. But is that something advisable that citizens should do, Attorney Turner? Start shooting at these armed suspects?
Well, there's of course a number of answers to that, but one of the primary concerns that I've always had as a policeman and an attorney was when you give someone the authority to carry a gun, you don't also require them to take training to learn how to use it. Most firearms, believe it or not, end up hurting more so people in your family than it does somebody that's committed a crime or they're attacking you. But if you're going to carry a firearm, particularly in Indiana now with this constitutional carry, then they should have some required training in terms of not just carrying the gun safely, but also using it. When you think about a mall, number one, if you aim at someone that you're shooting at in a mall, whether he's a mass shooter or not, it's very likely that that bullet will not hit him directly. The bullet could also penetrate him. The bullet could also ricochet, bouncing off the floors and walls that are concrete or some type of marble, and could end up hitting a lot of other people. So again, it's fine that there's a shooting and someone acts to terminate the shooting by shooting the person that is in fact actively killing people. But again, if they cannot do it accurately and professionally, then they might kill someone too, and there's some liability associated with that. So I think law still needs to be reinforced for training and safe carry. A lot of children, you don't know how many children I've responded to that were shot and killed picking up their parents' gun, and their parent thought they were protecting their family when in fact they were not. Another question that you asked that I think is very important is you asked about the percentage of people that are Black that are shot by police, some unarmed, some who have not committed a crime, some completely without justification, and the number of times they're shot. This young man that was shot 50 or 60 times, whether he committed a crime or not, that is excessive force. There's no arguing that. You don't have to shoot anything 50 or 60 times. And the answer to your question about why it happens more so, particularly to Black men, is that was reflected in Martin Luther King's speech when he talked about the conditions of the Black community in his letter from Birmingham jail. He said you had a generation of people suffering from the degenerating sense of nobodiness. And when the police look at us on the street, we're more so seen as nobody, that this is okay. There's a green light because it's a Black male or a minority, as opposed to a white person that somehow they feel is somebody. They'd have some, although they may have a justification to use deadly force, they feel it'll be screened a little bit more tightly. So I think that's the answer to that question. Okay,
Attorney Grimes, what's your opinion? You have these Good Samaritan becoming law enforcement officials. Is that, in your neck of the woods, is that a good idea or bad idea?
I think that it would apply in any neck of the woods, that you would be thankful that someone was there to save you from an assault. I understand the danger of citizens having guns and coming to people's rescue, but if some good Samaritan had been present there in Texas, and those 18, 19 kids got killed, maybe that many would not have gotten killed. Police officers make errors in shooting too. It's a human element when you have a gun. No matter how well trained you are, there's a possibility of collateral damage or whatever you may call it. So I don't know if I can set on an opinion, hard, fast opinion, that that's a reason why people shouldn't carry gun. There are a lot of other reasons why that show we have too many gun carriers in this country, but I just don't know a clear answer to the question.
Okay. Caller, you have a comment about our subject today. Caller?
Hello?
Yes, sir. You have a comment about
Can you hear me?
our
All right.
subject.
Yes, I do. How you doing, Brother Nate? Brother Milton up here, and thanks for calling. As a military veteran, we always was worried about or taught about friendly fire. And this young man's grandfather evidently took him out and taught him how to shoot. And he must have had clear sight, and he knew that. He probably had been hunting before, and he must have had clear sight because that line of sight was always trouble with us, especially when we were in training, making sure that you had a line of sight and then the friendly fire. And that does go along, Attorney Turner, with training. I mean, you have if you talk to a lot of Marines or people that was back from either Desert Storms 1, 2, Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever, there were a lot of soldiers injured from friendly fire. Oh, a whole lot more than what's even been talked about. Matter of truth, there were a lot of soldiers who were injured from shooting themselves. So much that the Marines got rid of the Colt 45 because there was too many accidental misfires with it, and they went to the Beretta, an Italian-made gun, people. The United States government supplies their Marines with an Italian-made gun because they figure the American-made gun is not safe enough for it. This is a fact. So that whole element there of friendly fire and making sure that you got line of sight, but that takes training. You're right. And in a crowded space, stuff like that, you just really better know. But I want to ask you guys a comment from the black judge in Michigan that lambasted the police, I think, earlier this week or last week, and now the police is mad and want to call for her to resign. I thought that took a lot of guts from her. I applaud the sister for doing it. See, here's my thing about black folks.
Wait a second. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that comment. What did the judge say? What did she do?
She talked about the treatment of black people. She talked about the disparaging treatment, running into houses of people who had a stop sign and stuff like that. When the Supreme Court said if it's a misdemeanor, you got to get a warrant before you can run into somebody's house. Just the disparaging treatment that they do. You know, Michigan has had some issues. The real estate broker who was showing houses and guns was pulled on him, and the young men who were just riding their bicycles in the neighborhood, and the police jumped them and threw them down. So they've had some issues, and she addressed it. And so the police is mad right now. And I look at it as like an addict. You know, when I was helping do counseling with drug addiction, the worst thing in the world is when a person wants to admit that they have a problem. And so that seems to be the issue. And Attorney Turner, you can deal with this because the FBI clearly put the report out that we have the KKK and white supremacists that have infiltrated law enforcement. This is not a supposition. This is a fact from the FBI's report. And so how, Attorney Turner, is the local governments, because I think that the mayors of these cities are letting people down. I think the mayors of these cities are letting black people down. I think the mayors of these cities could get up and stand up and have press conferences with these chiefs and put a directive out to these officers to, hey, cease and desist any discriminatory, racial, or profiling, stuff like that. Cease and desist it. And I haven't heard a mayor, not one mayor, in mostly Democratic cities, and I don't want to go politics there, but this is the truth. I haven't heard one mayor stand up and do that. Not in Baltimore after Freddie Gray. She tried to take up for them after that. So are we going to deal with this issue that we do know that white supremacists and the KKK have infiltrated law enforcement? The behavior shows they got it. We've seen tattoos from them that show they're affiliated with white supremacist law enforcement. Attorney Turner, when you were in there, how prevalent was it? And now with the FBI report, What would you say, since you're an ex-law enforcement, what would you say should be done to screen and get these guys out of there? And when you get a chance, Attorney Lee, look up Black judge in Michigan scolds police. Look it up. It's a big thing right now. And thanks for my call. Let's see. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. Lee,
That was a lot.
It was, but I agree with it. Now, but number one, the active participation of the Klan in law enforcement began back in the day. That was one of the reasons in terms of the death of the freedom fighters. That was clear back then when the law enforcement and actually participated with the Klan to commit those 3 murders. And what was happening once the FBI originally in that time of the civil rights struggles started focusing on the Klan for what they were doing, a member of the Klan simply became deputy sheriffs. And rather than killing Black males as the Klan member, they simply started killing them as deputy sheriffs. That's not new. That's been going on. The problem, of course, that I found in addressing the problem with police chiefs, and I said this last time we were on the show, I'm going to repeat it. The mayors don't pick qualified police chiefs. They pick their buddies, their political buddies, the people that's going to carry out their political agendas with them. There's no standards for police chiefs in America. I've applied for police chief position as an attorney with years of experience, not only as deputy chief of criminal investigations, but also director of training, even in Indianapolis. And the mayor picked the sheriff that was a sergeant, that was a high school grad. And of course, people never pay attention, but in Uvalde, Texas, when that so-called police chief ran over there and stood outside the building, that's when you know you don't have a police chief. But they never questioned it before. They never looked at his qualifications. They never looked at qualified people that applied who were turned down because the mayors, for the most part, are politicians and don't care about law enforcement. They pick chiefs that they can control. Police don't carry out their agenda, not police that will demand that you properly train and equip police because that will cost them money and they don't want to spend it. And that's certainly true in Indianapolis too.
Oh, that's a lot. Well, Attorney Banks, in your city in Chicago, I have significant problems with the Chicago Police Department, for example. And you have an African-American mayor up there. But in my experience, it's been difficult for me to find law enforcement officials who were truthful. I'm sure there's some outstanding police officers there, but the ones I've ran across were chronic liars. And I wonder about that because now you have the Mayor Lightfoot there in Chicago, and I don't know whether or not the police chief that they have there, for example, is doing a great job or poor job. What's your take on your situation there?
With respect to Chicago, Attorney Lee, and you've always having extensive experience in Chicago, have always stated that your premise that law enforcement lies. And we have seen that in many cases of African-American males that have been incarcerated for many, many years. And based on evidence that has been revealed, there are numerous examples of African-American men who have been released based on the incredible work of innocence projects in our state. But it is a problem. I would like to say and believe that most police officers believe in the credo of protect and serve, but there are some that need to be eradicated. And by that, I mean dismissed from an employment status in, law enforcement.
Well, Attorney Grimes, your city has been in the news like every day lately.
We have the best police department in America. They do no error. I mean, we've been dealing with this issue for years and years and years, and it just has not gotten right yet, Nate. I don't know, Mr. Turner, what the police chiefs across this nation, when they meet, what do they talk about? Do they talk about better ways of denying citizens their rights? Because they still profile out here in California.
Sure.
Whether you're driving, whether you're standing, whether you're sitting or whatever, they think it's a reasonable suspicion for any two or more African-American men to be together, whether it's in a car or on a corner or in a park. The mentality, the psychology has not changed, and we've changed police chiefs, we've changed sheriffs. They're still having, after years and years, a problem with not only one, but two different gangs in the sheriff department, tattooed up, got officers scared. So that's the beast that we have here, folks. And we've been talking about it for a number of years, but nothing solid or concrete has been done. So,
Well, since Rodney King, you haven't had any significant improvement?
we've had some changes. We've had some cosmetic changes, Nate, but the culture is still the same. They still abusing and disrespecting Black citizens. So what do you do with that mentality, Mr. Turner? You can change the chief, but the culture is still there.
Well, not necessarily, because the chief has to set the tone. That's the key. To me, the greatest deficiency with law enforcement in America is politics. Politics creates this volume, this vacuum that creates these policemen that believe they're the law. The way that you stop that is you have to have somebody in charge. And you don't necessarily blame the chief, like in Uvalde, Texas. Don't blame the chief. He knew he wasn't qualified when the mayor hired him. Blame the mayor. Had you had a competent chief there, that incident would have been over in a couple minutes. In a couple minutes. And that they couldn't have possibly, no real police officer, police chief could have stood there and watched those children get shot, listen to those gunshots, and not charge that place. But training is the key. And for me, since I was director of training, one of the focuses I always had was more training. Teaching police officers basic legal principles is pretty easy. That's true. Mm-hmm. Teaching them to shoot a gun is pretty easy. There's a lot of considerations you have to take. Certainly having good line of sight. You also have to consider whether the bullet, the round that you're using might penetrate the certain person you shot and go through and hit somebody else. There's a lot of considerations. But the greatest consideration of policing right now is to teach the police officers based on the continuing incidents of multiple fire where you're shooting people for the wrong reason. You're entering homes and shooting people who live there that have a right to protect themselves. There's a way that you have to do these things. And in some situations, when the police enter home, for example, and they're after something that cannot be destroyed, why would you have to come in there with force if you're looking for a certain item? Now, with narcotics, sometimes you have to enter a lot faster. I work narcotics also. And obviously, if you knock on the door and ring the doorbell, they're going to destroy the drugs. But charging into a home, no knock, all of a sudden in the middle of the night, you know people are asleep, they're going to react. It's their home, they're protecting their family, and they die. There's just no justification for that. So more training, it costs more money. And with policing, when you do find that someone has the wrong attitude, you have to have the ability to get rid of it. And that police officers are not fired as they should be. They set a tone, and when they demonstrate that they have a hostility of prejudice, whether it's racial prejudice or any other, whether or not they have attitudes of violence, if they have attitudes that demonstrate they cannot themselves comply with the law, alcoholism, drug use, you have to be able to get rid of those people and be able to hire other people right away. And sometimes that's a problem too, because not everybody wants to be a police officer now.
Well, it appears that they have unionized, at least here in California and maybe in the nation, to form such a power that a lot of elected officials, like our district attorney in LA, she was getting $1.5 million from the police union in Orange County, 2 million from the police union here in LA, million something from the police union in San Diego, from across the state.
Yes.
And so these guys are no longer just a high school graduate with no connection with it. They're a powerful organization politically. And a lot of public officials, including DAs, are afraid of them. So I'm assuming that their own chief knows the power that they carry. So
Absolutely. And that is unfortunate. One thing about being a chief, I was one, and the day that they swear you in, you know you're on your way out. I mean, that's just the way it is. So the question is, are you going to do the right thing when you're there? That's all you can do. Is you have to stand up for what is right. That's what I tried to do in Indianapolis. You know, when I was chief in Indianapolis, the murder rate was 65, with 90+% solved. It is now 300 with 90+% unsolved because of the different attitudes in policing, for people taking resources out, destroying the actual police department on the basis of money. For Indianapolis doesn't even have a helicopter. So we've had several people killed in police pursuits, innocent civilians. But if you had the helicopter, that would prevent things like that. And by the way, Mr. Lee, we also had a mass shooting on the canal. We had 3 or 4 women shot on the canal in Indianapolis. So there's a lot of things going on in Indianapolis and all major cities that can be addressed. But law enforcement right now is going to be a big challenge. And I'm sure you agree with this, Mr. Grimes, because in Indiana now, they have this constitution carry, so more people are going to have guns. So when a person jumps out of the car and runs from police, it's more likely the person either had a gun in the car or on his person, which means it's going to give justification to a police officer that says he was armed.
And it's more likely that when the police pull over young men or approach them on the corner there, they're more apprehensive and more likely to fire a weapon. It doesn't, going back to that Akron, Ohio situation, I remember when I was a kid hunting with my father in North Carolina, and he would say, don't shoot that rabbit there, boy, let that rabbit run so you can have something left, because that shotgun, I think it was a 20 gauge shotgun, it's going to blow into pieces. Point being, how many, they shot at him 90 times, hit him 60. I just imagine what his body looked like. It can't be much body left after that many shots. Nathan, you shoot, you know. So it just is not humane or humanly justifiable to shoot a person that many times from a range, it seems like, that they tried to use a taser on him. So I don't understand this.
Well, I think the answer to that. Go ahead.
Okay,
go ahead.
Attorney Banks, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. Our
Okay,
expert, I want to hear his response, please.
Okay, Attorney Turner, go ahead then. What was the response?
Well, I think we go back to that statement about nobodiness. I think when you have the green light, that's what I mean about with the training. Because in a police situation where you have an incident like that and the police hear a gunshot, then basically that's a go signal. Whistle blows. The deadly force is reasonable in this situation, so people start cutting loose and shooting. There's nothing. I've seen Superman movies where they didn't shoot Superman 60 times. So why in the world would anybody shoot anyone like that? The police have made the decision to fire because they think it's legal, and they don't consider whether or not it's excessive. Once the person is shot, and I've never seen any human that could stand up and be hit with a police round 1 or 2 times and not fall. Once you shoot somebody that many times, it's unreasonable, whether that person had a gun or not. It's excessive force.
And that was a situation that we witnessed recently in Akron, Ohio, with the young man there who was in the car, and I guess he got out and was running away. But the police officer said they thought he, quote, had a gun. And so I'm wondering whether or not there are any police reform efforts that are being instituted anywhere across the nation that would focus on extensive training or retraining, if you will, as well as psychological testing as in the application process for police officers as they're being considered for law enforcement.
There are,
Go ahead, Tony.
there are many considerations for retraining. Usually that is controlled by the chief and the mayor by budgets. One of the things I did when I was director of training for the Indianapolis Police Department is throughout the nation, we have an incident that happened, Rodney King being one. You train on that incident. You highlight various incidents, the choking death of Gardner in New York. I mean, there's so many situations that happen that rational thought would have prevented. That's what I mean about more money and more training. You have to take the opportunity, given your circumstances at that time in history, to train your police officers to deal with modern situations that they've not seen before.
You know, I was in a case I had some years ago. I went out to San Bernardino, and they got a lot of outlying area where people can go shooting in ravines and stuff, and people do that. They have built structures out there that people would shoot at. And I recall it's the mentality. I saw some shooters, and there's a joy with a couple of shooter even shooting a structure and just shooting it to pieces until it's almost no more. And there's a yay! There's some, I don't know if you've ever seen it, Vanita, but I'm sure these two gentlemen have seen that type of joy, and it's like a football touchdown when you destroy that structure with that gun. It's kid-like attitude, but it's a yay. And I just sat in here while we were talking, thinking about them killing that man, shooting him 60 times, shooting at him 90 times and hitting him 60 times. The exhilaration that's gotten because you destroyed that structure, not a human being.
Let me respond to that, because you reminded me of something. When I joined the police department and we took firearms training, our training course was 60 rounds, and our gun held so many rounds. So when they blew the whistle, we pointed at the target, and you basically fired till the gun was empty. And then you reloaded and fired, the gun was empty. So we change this training scenario. We don't blow a whistle. What we do is give a scenario. We have this situation. You confront a certain incident or person that is armed and dangerous, and you shoot around. The person is down. You fire 1 or 2 rounds and you assess, and then you fire another round if the person is still in danger. You think while you're shooting. Now, if you just train them to shoot, which most police departments do, then they're not thinking when they're shooting. And I think that might be the problem that they're facing.
Wow. Attorney Banks, you had a comment?
Well,
And I didn't mean to be sexist when I excluded you, Miss Banks. I just know you're a proper lady. That's all.
She could be. Hopefully carry big guns too.
No.
I have somewhat reception problems today, and it may be where I am located as I'm calling in a building about 17 floors high. But having said that, I wanted to ask our attorney expert about what many individuals' normal reaction would be with some of these shootings, because I know that you have an informed answer. And the question is, why did they have to shoot to kill as opposed to shooting in the leg or the arm or something like that?
Well, actually, the police are trained to shoot to kill. That's what I mean about training. The reason I think the training was focused on killing was because if the person is truly an active threat to you, if he's actually got a gun and is shooting at you and you shoot the person in the arm when they're trying to shoot to kill you, then you're going to be more likely to lose that battle. So if the decision is made to shoot because your life is in jeopardy, somebody else's life is in jeopardy, you can't take the chance of shooting in the leg when that person's holding a gun and pointing at someone ready to fire.
Mr. Turner, but that's not the example. This person did not have a weapon on him. It wasn't a person with a weapon that was a threat to an officer. This person, for all intents and purposes, if he had a gun, he left it in the car.
Right. Well, I was addressing the training, why they trained to shoot to kill. I wasn't addressing that situation.
Yeah.
In terms of a person running away, as far as I'm concerned, whether they're armed or not, I've had plenty of people run that were armed that we did not shoot because they weren't a threat. They had a gun, but their back was turned and they were running away. That's not a threat to me. So in many cases, we had people that were running from us with a gun, but we knew who they were. So we simply waited and went and got them. So this is, again, a problem with the training and leadership of that department. And again, why do people in Uvalde, Texas, wait until you have these children murdered to question whether or not their chief is qualified? They don't ever do that. I've been screaming about this for years because time and time again, you had very well-trained, educated people who could have been chief, and they picked some guy that went through high school and never had any qualifications because there's a political connection, an agenda connection, or a racist connection. There should be standards for police officers. There should be standards for police chiefs, and particularly a police chief, if you're going to have them in charge of a department that takes such action like taking people's lives. Why that's not the case in America, I don't understand.
You know, I was in Montgomery, Alabama all last week at a seminar that my law college was putting on, and a half a day we toured the tribute to the African Americans that have been hung and beaten and killed across this country since the end of slavery up through the Reconstruction period up to 1950. And it's over 4,000, as you all well know. And then we saw the other museum that Brian Stevens has put together, from enslavement to imprisonment. But, you know, to read that to read some of the statements as to why some people were killed and hung and burned and shot because they didn't say sir to someone, or they asked a white woman for some water, or just the slightest little incident that wouldn't justify anything but a no, if even that, because they didn't look at us as human beings.
Exactly.
And they just, you know, this exhibit that this man has put on down there is really very moving and impressive, y'all, if you haven't seen it or been there. It's a lot different than reading about it in books. But you get the feeling that white folks just don't value Black lives.
And that's what Martin Luther King said. That's the degenerating sense of nobodiness. And because of that, and because this continues, that's why I just continue to emphasize the people that make laws in America need to require that there's certain educational standards, training standards for people that lead police departments, not just picking Bubba out because he's the mayor's brother-in-law. And that's happening time and time again today, as it did back in the 50s and 60s when the Mississippi burning and the freedom fighters, all these people were being murdered. Nothing has changed.
Okay, to our guests, we have a bunch of texts on our board here. Here's what the issues are from the text we're getting, the messages. One person, Chisley, were concerned about giving police $34 billion for law enforcement. What's the purpose and how effective that's going to be? Two, Pierre want to know, how does a police officer on a chase know whether or not a person become a threat? So, but the first one is that this $34 billion that Mac Chisley talking about, how does that, well, I don't know, 34 billion is a lot of money. I'm not quite, I didn't see that legislation as to what it was for. Are any of you guys familiar with that legislation our caller is talking about?
Well, there's always been federal grants to police officers. That's not unusual, but when you look at 34 billion spread out over America, to all police department, law enforcement agencies. It's not a lot of money. But let me give you an example. As you know, when I was director of public safety, the one thing I insisted on was buying a helicopter. It cost $5 million. But we've got the helicopter. We were then able to get up in the air and assist in shootings, because as soon as we got a run on a shooting, that helicopter could be over the scene night or day. They could pick up people in cars leaving the scene. They could photograph it. We'd have video of it. We had infrared. We had all those things in that helicopter. The mayor that came next, Mr. Ballard, sold that helicopter for $2 million. It's $2 million. Not one person in Indianapolis said a thing. Not a thing. We don't have a helicopter now. We got an old one, the same old one we had when I joined the police department. It is so old that cars actually outrun the helicopter. And it doesn't have the infrared. It doesn't have the things that law enforcement needs. Also, the $34 billion can help with the training that I just emphasized. Not only to hire better educated police officers that require maybe a higher salary, but give them better options in terms of less than deadly force options, and let them have body cameras, let them have bulletproof vests, so perhaps they won't be so afraid. We talked about the shooting where the young man jumped out of the car and police shot him. There was a question, well, how do you know the person is armed? It doesn't matter. Even an armed person running from the police may not be a threat to the officer. If there's no threat, if there's really no serious threat of injury to the officer or someone else, he still shouldn't use deadly force to shoot that person down. So I think the money is necessary. I think it's reasonable. The problem is you're putting the $34 billion in the hands of the same Bubba that I'm talking about. And all he's going to do is use the money to boost his salary and to hire another brother-in-law that doesn't know what he's doing. So there has to be standards for law enforcement, training for particularly the chiefs, and certainly educational requirements.
Okay. And
then certainly hearkening back to the President Obama administration, there was a Blue Ribbon task force, national task force with experts across the nation that in their 21st century police report made numerous recommendations for police reform in our nation. So in my opinion, that's a good starting point for states and local law enforcement nationwide.
It is, in fact, a good starting point. I remember that. As a matter of fact, I tried to get on that panel. I'm still waiting for Obama to respond. The problem with that is if the chief and the mayor that we're talking about pick the panel, recommend people to send to Washington or to put on various boards and panels, you're not going to get the kind of thought and input that you need in terms of what's happening in the Black community. Even with Black people participating, you have to have somebody with the nerve to stand up and speak the truth and do the right thing to send and make recommendations for laws and efforts of law enforcement in America.
I agree with you, of course, wholeheartedly. And on these foot pursuit policies, I stated before that I was surprised that there wasn't a policy, at least here in Illinois, and one, as you know, has been announced in the aftermath of two young men that were very high exposure cases here in Chicago, where the police officers were viewed to have not, were not charged. And so as a result, there was a announcement after study that in those foot pursuit cases that they would not be permitted if a individual was running away, as well as you would not chase individuals for misdemeanor traffic offense type of cases.
Well, the problem we have, though, is that, and we need to address this, is that it sounded like we get a lot of text messages about rising crime, and Attorney Turner talked about it. And I know Attorney Grimes has an issue as to how the police officers in their neck of the wood treat African Americans that are more than one person at a time. So we probably have to continue this discussion another week, because next week we probably need to tackle how do we, as a community, reduce crime. We have an uptick in violent crimes all across America. When Donald Trump became president, we would have about 250, 260 mass shootings in America. It's escalated to over 600. So he became the president of deficit and mass shooting. And now this trend is over 600 per year now. It affecting every neighborhood, whether you're in the suburbs or the inner city, it doesn't matter. Mass shootings become a deadly consequence all over the place. Now, one final comment from our guests, because we have 1 minute before we close out. Attorney Banks, any final closing comment?
Well, my comment is that the bipartisan Keep Our Children Safe Act that was recently passed by Congress is a good start, and that we have to go back and address these weapons of mass destruction that the Constitution, the founders of our Constitution, certainly they did not contemplate that the Second Amendment would have included these weapons of war.
Attorney Grimes?
We have to keep talking about these issues in an open forum, Nate, and we just haven't solved them yet. So it's no time to rest and sit back on our laurels and say, well, we hired a new African-American police chief, or we've got more African-Americans into politics, or we got this success or that success. When we look at the end result, things haven't changed for the average person. So we got to keep fighting.
Attorney Turner, one final comment.
Well, I think that having an African-American police chief is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't really matter. I don't care if he's Japanese, Korean, I don't care what he is. Have somebody who knows what they're doing. People cannot sit back, as Uvalde, Texas, and do nothing when the mayor appoints someone that doesn't know what they're doing, and then scream like hell when the man, his actions result in killing children, like happened in Texas. Do something now. Talk to your local lawmakers. Do something now about the incompetence of leadership in police departments, and put standards in place. Not just hiring African Americans. That's not going to fix it. There's African American leaders that don't know what they're doing. Get somebody in there that knows what they're doing.
Agreed.
Well, thank you, everyone. Our VIP guest panel, thank you. A very good discussion today. We have to continue this next week, because every day I wake up, there's somebody in our city been murdered. So we have to deal with these community issues. Well, thank you, our audience, and tune in next Saturday. We will deal with these important issues. And if it's a legal issue, we're going to talk about it. Thank you, everybody. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you for having me.